Today, we're teaching on the book of Corinthians, and we are learning Paul's preaching to the Corinthians. We get a story from book of Acts, and then we're going to jump into the letter to the Corinthians, and as an example. So let's look at the story how Paul and his companion servants went to the church in Corinth and went to the to the city of Corinth and establish a church. So let's go to the story. So this is the map. This map we can see the Corinth. It's right here. It's in the lower part of Greece called Achaia. So we know Paul went to different places. He went to Corinth. He went to Ephesus. He went to Galatia. All different churches in the Asia Minor, and so forth. Greece and so forth. So anyway, so let's go to the to the story. Book of Acts, chapter 18, 1 to 19. A lot of people say, well, let's have the Acts today, and so forth. I got some news, the only 4 or 5 chapters of beginning of the Acts, mention about Peter and the other disciples, But the rest of the Acts really focus on Paul, how he's building the churches throughout Asia Minor and so forth. But we have here in sheets say from the preacher how how we learn the Bible. But the thing is, we got to read it for ourselves, So anyway, so as we look in the book of Acts, we know that more than half of it, it talks about how Paul and other disciples, and his servants, they built churches. So that's the book of Acts. It's a history of the church, and spreading the message. So let's look at the story. Acts chapter 18, verse 1. Verse 1. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came into them. We know who's Claudius. Claudius, it was Caesar. We know the first Caesar of Rome called Octavian, or also called Augustus. Remember book of Matthew? Caesar Augustus gave a decree, for all to be registered. Caesar Augustus. Another name for Augustus was Octavian. That's the first Caesar of the Rome. After him was Tiberius, and then so forth, and then Claudius, and so forth. So Claudius was during that time. After Claudius was Nero, and so forth. So anyway, Claudius was the Roman Caesar during that time. So verse 2, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came into them. Verse 3, and because he was of the same craft, he abode with them, and wrought for their occupation there were tent makers. So we know what Paul's job was a tent maker. When in verse 3, it talks about the third person. The third person that we talk about is he, which is Paul. The same craft, the same job. He abode with them and wrote for their occupation there were tent makers. So Paul, to decide if he wasn't teaching, he was making tents. So we learn that in Acts 18 verse Acts 18 verse 3. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. Persuaded what? Persuade to to come to the knowledge of Jesus Christ. So by their occupation they were tent makers. Verse 5. And when Silas and Timotheus were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in the spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus was Christ. So he felt anxious to testify to the Jews, hey, that Jesus was Christ. And what Christ means? Christ in Hebrew called Messiah, or also Mashiach. Mashiach also means anointed one, So in Greek, Christ means, Christ, which means Christos. But in Hebrew, means Messiah or Messiah. Anyway, well, verse 6, and when they opposed themselves and blasphemed, he took his raiment and said to them, your blood be upon your own heads. I'm clean from henceforth. I will go into Gentiles. So when Paul went to Corinth, it's like he was trying to convert Jews to come to Jesus Christ, but the Jewish people were stiff-necked. They were hard-headed people. So Paul's like, forget it. I'm going to Gentiles. So that's what Paul did. Verse 7, and he departed thence and entered into a certain man's house named Justus, one that worshipped God, whose house joined hard to the synagogue. Verse 8, and Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his house, and many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized. Then spake the Lord to Paul in the night by a vision. That's pretty cool. Imagine if Jesus talks to you in a vision. Now let's follow the words. That would be pretty cool, right? How about that? Be not afraid, but speak and hold thy peace. For I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee. For I am much people in the city. And he continued there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. That's pretty cool, right? You get a vision from Jesus, and he's talking to you. I mean, yeah, better than the president, How about that? But, better than a superstar. So, and he continued there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. Verse 12, and when Gallio was the deputy of Achaia, we know Achaia was a region at the lower part of Greece. That's where the city Corinth was located, in the region of Achaia. So, the Jews made an insurrection with one accord against Paul and brought him to the judgment seat, saying, this fellow persuaded man to worship God contrary to the law. And when Paul was now about to open his mouth, Gallio, saying to the Jews, if it were a matter of wrong or wicked lewdness, O you Jews, reason would that I should bear with you. But if it be a question of words and names and of the law, of your law, look you to it, for I will be no judge of such a matter. So, we see Jewish people, how they're trying to get Paul in prison because he's trying to spread the message of Jesus Christ. He's trying to convert Jewish people to come to Jesus. But what happens, Jewish people were so hard-headed, he was trying to put Paul in prison. And not just Paul, but also his fellow servants, So, verse 16, and he drave them from the judgment seat. Then all the Greeks took Sudnes, the chief ruler of synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat, and Gallio cared for none of these things. And Paul after this tarried there yet a good while, and then took his leave of the brethren, and sailed thence into Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn his head in Caesarea, for he had a vow. Well, we see how we see how Paul got beaten for that. We see that, and then verse 18, we see having shorn his head. We see how Paul cut his hair. He shortened his hair. Verse 18, and then left to Caesarea. I guess he cut his hair because he made a vow, a promise. So, verse 19, and he came to Ephesus and left them there, but he himself entered into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. So, he really had a heart for the Jewish people because he was a Jew, but also he was a Roman citizen. So we see the event, what happened in the city of Corinth, during that time. So let's go to the letter of Corinthians, how he writes back, to the church, how he writes back to the people, to the church in that place, So 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. So let's follow with the word. Now as touching things offering to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffed up, but charity edified. And if any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing, yet as he ought to know. But if any man love God, the same is known of him. As concerning therefore the eating of those things that are offered and sacrificed into idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other God but one. For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we in Him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, whom are all things, and we by Him. Verse 7. By whom all things, and we by Him. Verse 7. Howbeit there is not in every man the knowledge, for some with conscience of the idol into this hour eat. It is as thing offered into the idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So we see how people give themselves to the to idols and idolize the things, and their conscience is weakened. It pretty much is becoming unsensitized as they give their mind to idolatry and so forth. Verse 8. But meat commandeth us not to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, neither if we eat not are we the worst. Verse 9. But take heed lest by any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to them that are weak. For if any man see thee which has knowledge sit at the meat in the idol's temple, shall not the conscience of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols? And through thy knowledge shall the weak brother perish from whom Christ died? But when you sin so against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. So basically, let's say they don't want to eat meat, because for some reason, and they're vegetarian, you don't want to affect their, offend them, that you eat meat in front of them, because some people, they're vegetarian for some reason, you don't want to offend them, That's what Paul's writing to Corinthians, during that time. But what's it called? And then that's an example. But at the same time, we don't go around and offend people. We don't want to, especially the ones that are new, new in Christ. We don't want to offend them. We want to encourage them. So we don't want to put them down, but encourage them. So we see that verse 12, verse 13. Wherefore, if meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Are not you my work in the Lord? If I be not an apostle unto others, yet doubtless I am to you, for the seal of mine apostleship are you in the Lord. Mine answer to them that do examine me is this: have we not power to eat and drink? Have we not power to lead about a sister, a wife, as well as other apostles, and as the brethren of the Lord, and Cephas? We know who Cephas was Peter. Another name for Peter is Cephas. So we see that in the book of Acts, Peter is Cephas. So, verse 6, or I only and Barnabas have not we power to forbear working, who goeth warfare any time at his own charges, who planted a vineyard and eateth not of the fruit therefore, or who feedeth a flock and eateth not of the milk of the flock. So we learn this in verse 7, how Paul and Barnabas, they go to warfare. They every time they try and plant a church, there's challenges. There's challenges, and warfare for them to plant a church. But they don't go back and try to charge those people. Hey, we built a church for you guys. Now you guys got to pay me. It's a free charge. Say I these things as a man, or said not the law the same also? For it is written in the law of Moses, thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Do it, God, take care for oxen. Don't go. Basically, what Paul's saying, the things that to people that you do good, don't go back and charge them, for the things that you do good to them. Don't go back and charge them. So that's what Paul's writing to the Corinthians. Verse 10, or said he altogether for our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he that ploweth should plow in hope, and that he that thresheth in hope should be partaker of his hope. If we have sown into you spiritual things, it is a great thing if we shall reap your carnal things. If others be partakers of this power over you, are not we rather? Nevertheless, we have not used this power, but suffer all things lest we should hinder the gospel of Christ. So, in verse 12, it's saying, hey, we're suffering for the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're not suffering in vain, we're not doing this because of the, a beautiful day, We're doing it because, it's for Jesus Christ, and there's challenges. So he's writing this letter to the church in Corinth. Verse 13. Do you not know that they which minister about holy things live of the things of the temple, and they which wait at the altar are partakers with the altar? Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel. So pretty much he's saying, hey, you teach the gospel, you live by the gospel. And what's the gospel? It's the good news. It's the grace. It's the liberty in Jesus. That's what it is. But I have used none of these things, neither have I written these things, that it should be so done unto me. For it were better for me to die than that any man should make my glory void. For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yet woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel. So it's, basically he's writing to them, to the Corinthians, hey, if I don't preach the gospel, woe unto me. I'm chosen to do this. I'm designated to do this, and I have to, teach the gospel. I have to preach the gospel. So, verse 17. For if I do this thing willingly, I have a reward. But against my will, I have dispensation of the gospel is committed unto me. What is my reward then? Verily, that when I preach the gospel, I may make the gospel of Christ without charge, that I abuse not my power in the gospel. For though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself a servant into all, that I might gain the more. So when Paul's writing to them, we see that he's basically telling them, I'm a servant, and I'm a servant, and I don't charge, the gospel of Christ. It's free. It's a free of charge. I don't ask money. He's not charging the Corinthians. He's not charging the places he goes to, for the gospel of Christ. He's not charging them. It's a free charge. So, and he's telling them, I'm a servant, to Jesus. Verse 20, and into the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. So we know Jews were under the law. And what the law? 10 Commandments, We know there are two kind of law. Civil laws and the 10 Commandments. They are written on the stones. So Jewish people, Judaism, they're under the 10 Commandments, the law of Moses. So he's saying, verse 20, that I might gain them that are under the law. 21, to them that are without law, as without law, which we know that's Gentiles. Being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. That's what Paul's saying. Verse 22, to the weak became as I weak, that I might gain the weak. I made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. And if this and this I do for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker thereof with you. Know you not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize, so run that you may obtain. So what race is talking about? The race of, the race of faith, the race of faith, the race of the salvation, the race of faith, and Jesus, the race of salvation. So it is a race. It is a faith, a faith walk, So, verse 25, and every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we uncorruptible. So the whole goal, for being a Christian is to get a crown incorruptible, not a crown that's corruptible. A crown of life, a crown of, success, a crown of life, So it's a reward. I therefore so run, not as an uncertainty, so fight I, not as I one that beateth the air, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be cast away. So he's trying to tell the Corinthians, hey, I'm keep my body in subjection. I'm not going to let myself, to fall under sin. I'm not going to let myself to fall under sin, but I keep my body in subjection, where I don't fall into the adulterous or fornication or stealing or stealing from your neighbor and so forth. So he said, pretty much, I'm on the grace, and I'm not gonna live this body, to put me under sin. So that's why he's sacrificing the flesh, subjection. He's putting the body to bring out subjection. So where Jesus living through him. Romans chapter 5:20. Moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound, but where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. So that's what we see. So let's find out what abound means in Greek. Abound in Greek means hyperperiso, which means exceeding or overflow. So where sin abounded, grace abounded much more. So we know that we're not under the law, we're not under the rules of regulation, but we're under grace. Grace, it's charis, So where sin abounded, grace abound much more. So we see that, which means exceedingly an overflowing of grace. So, you're not under the rules of regulation, but under grace, under unmerited favor. You accept it. So when you fall short, when you sin, know that you're under grace, and you're redeemed. So anyway, and that's what more abound means: exceeding, overflowing. So this the map of the early church, and again, the map of Asia Minor and so forth, and the Church of Corinth, where Paul went. So anyway, thank you for watching this. Thank you, guys. And before we closing this, we need your donation and your help. Please donate to this ministry. This will help us to sustain the broadcast every week that we're trying to have. So please help us with a donation and your support. So thank you for watching this, and God bless you. Thank you.